The silt cloud disperses in slow motion, revealing not one watch but dozens of constellation of gold and steel scattered across the basalt like dropped stars. Pierce knelt in the submersible's cramped sphere, his face pressed against the acrylic, counting. 37. No. 40. The ROV's lights swept the debris field, and more glints appeared in the darkness beyond. March 1989. The Atlantic floor.
We are working hard and improving day by day to entertain you, so please subscribe our channel.
200 nautical miles east of Cape Hatteras, 1,100 feet below the surface, where the continental shelf dropped into the abyss. The wreckage lays scattered aluminum skin twisted like foil, seats bolted to fuselage. Personal effects creating a museum of sudden catastrophe, but the insurance company hadn't hired them to recover bodies or black boxers. This operation had a different mandate: locate and secure approximately 300 high value. Time: the submersible Triton III hovered above the main impact crater, thrusters fighting the slow circular current. Inside, Pierce operated the mechanical arm with movements refined over 2 decades. He extended the hydraulic claw toward the nearest watch, a gold Rolex suit, its crystal cracked, the dial frozen at 4:17. The moment of impact, the moment when everything stopped. Behind him, Hansen monitored the equipment bank's depth: oxygen, hydraulics, battery. The support ship Venture held position on the surface, a distant point in an unreachable world. They had 4 hours of power remaining, 4 hours to collect as many timepieces as possible before ascending through the crushing darkness. Pierce activated the vacuum collection system, a modified design for delicate salvage. The watches were too small for standard grapples. Instead, a gentle suction apparatus with individually sealed compartments. The first Rolex, lifted from the sediment in a cloud of particles, drawn into the transparent tube, sealed with a pneumatic hiss. Pierce marked its GPS coordinates on the digital map, evidence for the investigation. For the lawsuits, the second watch was wedged beneath a section of wing flap. Pierce maneuvered the arm carefully, mindful of jagged aluminum edge. The submersible carried no backup systems at this depth. One critical failure meant emergency ascent, meant abandoning the mission. The wing flap shifted as he worked. Suddenly, a dozen more watches tumbled free, cascading down the slope into deeper set. Pierce swore silently and repositioned the submersible, descending another 10 feet, 1,115 feet, the depth where recreational divers couldn't follow. He collected the scattered watches one by one: Rolex, Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, names that meant nothing to him beyond their insurance valuations. Each piece represented someone's illusion of permanence. Now they lay broken on the ocean floor. An hour passed. 27 watches secured. The containers were filling steadily, but 300 watches scattered across a quarter-mile meant they couldn't recover everything in one dive. This would require multiple expeditions. Pierce guided the submersible along the programmed search pattern. Some watches had tumbled into crevices. Others lay exposed on flat plains. A few were buried, visible only to sonar. The darkness beyond the lights held secrets the submersible would never reach. Fish moved through the wreckage, rattles and grenadiers, deep sea. Occasionally, a larger shadow crossed the periphery sharks, or the massive six-gill predators of the abyss. He found a cluster of watches near what remained of the cockpit, tangled in debris. Working here felt invasive, disrespectful somehow. This was where they had died, where the ocean had rushed up to meet them at terminal velocity. Pierce collected the watches with mechanical precision, refusing to think about the context. The ocean didn't care about narrative or tragedy. 2 hours elapsed, 49 watches secured. The battery indicators showed declining reserves. The current had strengthened. Hansen signaled time to consider ascent parameters. They could push for another hour, maybe 90 minutes. Running out of power at 1,100 feet meant death. Pierce worked faster, extending the arm to its maximum reach. A Rolex President with a diamond bezel, a steel submariner with a cracked crystal, a gold date still attached to a corroded briefcase strap, each piece a fragment of interrupted lives. The terrain grew more complex near the debris field's western edge. Basalt rose in irregular formations, creating overhangs and small caves. Pierce descended into a narrow channel, the hull scraping against stone. Proximity alarms chirped steadily. Hansen's hand appeared on his shoulder, a warning. But Pierce saw them, at least 20 timepieces wedged in a crevice, clustered together as if seeking shelter. He maneuvered the arm into the tight space, the hydraulic joints protesting. He began extracting them one by one. Gold, steel, platinum. The metals gleamed dully in the artificial light. Then the arm stuck. Pierce reversed the hydraulics, but something had caught. The hydraulic gauges showed increasing strain. If a seal failed, fluid would contaminate the collection system. Hansen checked the external cameras, trying to locate the obstruction. The thrusters fought the current, holding position against stone. They had perhaps 5 minutes to solve this. Pierce rotated the wrist joint slowly, feeling for the catch point. There, a section of aircraft seat frame had hooked around the elbow joint. He needed to rotate backward. He worked the controls delicately. The arm slipped free suddenly. The submersible lurched upward from the released tension. Pierce secured the remaining watches quickly. 73 watches now. A successful first dive. Hansen programmed the ascent trajectory. Pierce sealed the collection containers. The submersible's nose tilted upward. They began the slow climb back toward light. The darkness changed quality as they ascended. At 1,000 feet, the blackness remained absolute. At 800 feet, the first hints of bioluminescence appeared, tiny organisms igniting, creating trails of green-blue light. At 600 feet, the darkness began transitioning to profound navy. The ascent required 70 minutes, following a careful decompression profile. Pierce and Hansen sat in silence, monitoring systems. At 400 feet, schools of fish appeared in the light amberjacks and barracuda. At 200 feet, the water turned deep blue. Pierce could see the Venture's hull above them. The submersible broke through at 15 minutes past noon, emerging into a gray March afternoon. The support crew moved quickly, securing lifting cables. Pierce climbed out, his legs unsteady, his eyes adjusting to brightness. The collection containers were transferred to the research lab. Pierce didn't participate in the opening. His job ended when the submersible returned to deck, but he watched through the lab windows. The first container opened. Technicians removed the first watch, that gold submariner, still frozen at 417. They placed it in a bath of distilled water, beginning the desalination process. One by one, the watches emerged. Some were completely corroded. Others had survived better. Each represented a different degree of survival. The restoration team photographed each piece. Serial numbers were recorded. Some watches had provenance extending back decades. Pierce watched them work through the afternoon. 73 watches from a total of approximately 300. The insurance company had budgeted for 8 dives over 2 weeks. By evening, 20 watches had been moved to secondary treatment. 3 watches were declared total losses. The remaining 50 were assessed as partially salvageable. Pierce returned to the deck at sunset. The ocean looked peaceful, giving no indication of the depths below. Tomorrow, they would descend again, and the day after, until the debris field yielded its cargo of interrupted time. The restoration team worked through the night. Their gloved hands moved with the precision of surgeons. The head restorer Chun examined a Rolex GMT master under magnification. The bezel had corroded, but the movement showed minimal penetration. She made notes, estimating 6 months of work. Another technician worked on a Patek Philippe. Its case had developed a peculiar patina. The dial had detached, but the mechanism appeared intact. This one might be savable. Pierce didn't sleep. He studied the sonar maps, planning the next day's search pattern. Dawn came gray and cold. The crew prepared the submersible for the second dive. They descended at 0800 hours. The seafloor materialized gradular basalt, sediment, scattered aircraft structure, and there, gleaming in the lights, the curve of a watch case. They began collecting again. By the end of the second dive, they had recovered 62 more watches. By the end of the week, they had collected 217. The restoration lab filled with trays of timepieces. Some had already been cleaned and dried. Others still soaked in desalination baths. The most damaged pieces were set aside. On the final dive, Pierce located the aircraft's cargo container. The impact had crushed it nearly flat, but in one corner, protected by compressed metal, He found a watertight case, still sealed, containing 12 watches that had never been exposed to the ocean. He secured the case carefully. The submersible ascended for the final time. The Venture remained on station another 2 days, but the active recovery phase had ended. They had recovered what they could reach. The rest would remain. In the restoration lab, Chun opened the watertight case. The watches were pristino corrosion, no damage. Their crystals gleamed. Their movements, when wound, began ticking again immediately. The contrast was striking. Chun wound each pristine watch and set them running. She listened to the mechanical heartbeat that had survived against probability. Then she turned back to the damaged pieces. The Venture departed a salvage site 3 days later. The ocean returned to its normal rhythms. Below, in the permanent darkness, time had stopped. Above, in the restoration lab, time began again. The first restored watch returned to function 4 months later. Chun wound it carefully, set the time, and listened. More would follow. Not all, but enough survived. Enough endured. In a climate-controlled vault in Virginia, the restored watches were cataloged and stored. Each one carried its story, silently. Pierce never saw them after the expedition ended. His job was the recovery. What happened after belonged to others, but sometimes he thought about those watchers still lying on the ocean floor. They would remain there indefinitely. Eventually, they would disappear completely, and yet they had kept time. Once, time stopped at 4:17. But in the restoration lab, through patient hands, time started again, proving that even at the bottom of the ocean, endings were never quite final. Chun placed the now-ticking steel submariner on a velvet pad. She took a final photograph. A ledger noted the tally. Recovered, 217. Restorable, approximately 150. In a Virginia vault, a technician placed a restored Patek Philippe into a numbered drawer. Rows of drawers held each story. Pierce sat in his apartment, staring at the city lights. He remembered a final, solitary glint just out of reach. He looked at his own simple diver's watch. At the docks, a message from Hansen waited, found a new site. Interested, Pierce smiled. A nodded. Underwater, sediment slowly buried the unrecovered wreckage. In an auction house, a gavel fell, sold. A collector examined a restored Rolex. Noting its provenance, they listened to its restored tick. Cut to the ocean floor. Darkness, eternal currents. In her workshop at dawn, Chun worked on the most challenging piece. Her hands were steady, patient. A fused gear finally shifted. The movement turned freely. She let out a breath of satisfaction. On a new ship, Pierce and Hansen looked at sonar readings for a different wreck. A freighter, not an aircraft. Pierce guided the new submersible along the wreck's side. A flash of memory. The glint of a watch. He shook it off, focused on the present. The sub's arm cleared sediment from a hatch. A reconnaissance drone floated into a cargo hold. It revealed a wooden crate, partially disintegrated. Inside, the gleam of brass scientific instruments. "We have confirmation," Hansen said. Pierce used the drone's manipulators to extract a sextant. Its mirrors were clear, reflecting the light. The drone returned, placing the sextant in the collection basket. A clean recovery. On deck, Pierce handed the sextant to an archaeologist. A respectful nod. In the ship's mess, a text arrived on Pierce's phone from an unknown number. "The Patek Calatrava is keeping perfect time. Thank you." He didn't reply. He just looked at the message. At dawn, the sun broke the horizon over the vast ocean. In the vault, the watertight case was opened. A gloved hand selected one watch for return to next of kin. An elderly woman received the package at her door. She opened it at her kitchen table. It was her husband's watch. She held it to her chest, tears welling. A piece had returned. Underwater, near the freighter, Pierce's lights caught a modern watch. Aracentlos. He hesitated. The arm descended and picked it up. An unplanned mercy. "Not on the manifest," Hansen said. "It is now," Pierce replied quietly. Back at the docks, Pierce packed his car. "Next one?" Hansen asked. "Next one." Pierce confirmed. In her workshop, Chun placed the final restored watch into a box and closed the lid. On a beach at sunset, she sat on a bench, watching the horizon. The workshop was clean. Tools put away. Only the first restored submariner remained on the bench, catching the light. Its second hand swept. Time passeth. Pierce mailed the modern watch to a loose. He looked at a photo of himself and his father on a fishing boat. June gave her mother's restored watch to her daughter. "Keep it wound," she said. A deep-sea isopod crawled over a lost watch case. Life continued. A museum exhibit opened. Interrupted time. The elderly woman touched the empty slot where her husband's watch had been. A storm gathered on the horizon.
The vortex is forming.
Hansen called Pierce.
Heading straight for the coast.
Big low pressure system. Reminds me of March '89. Pierce listened, looking at clear sky. He knew the storm was coming. He opened a tub with his old dive shirt, held it, then put it back. The storm arrived. Waves crashed, rain lashed windows. But at 1,100 feet, all was calm. Currents shifted silt, burying history deeper. A single silt particle landed on a cracked crystal in his living room during the storm. Pierce lit an oil lamp. He was calm. He remembered being a boy, dropping a watch off a dock, watching it sink. It was never about retrieval. It was about witnessing dawn after the storm. The ocean was glassy, peaceful. Chun stepped outside, her mother's watch accurate against the sunrise. Sunlight streamed into the museum exhibit. A child pressed her nose to the glass, seeing her reflection over the watches. Adan Airfield Pierce and Hansen boarded a small plane for land survey. A new phase. The plane took off, banking over the coast. A watchmaker in Switzerland assembled a new movement. A wave deposited a smooth stone on the beach. Pierce's plane became a speck over the continent, a slow push-in on the museum case. The watches were silent, but their presence spoke. From below the surface, the setting sun was a distorted, fiery ball. A single bubble from the depths rose and broke the surface. Absolute, perfect, perpetual darkness, where stories settle. Fade from black to a single, steady point of light. The luminous hour marker of a watch in a dark room. A tiny beacon in the vastness of time.